Good evening. Hi, my name is Peter Hinton-Davis, and I'm a director of plays and operas in the theater. Everything is the same, but different, is what Gertrude Stein said, responding to the catastrophes of her own lived time. When I think about reconnecting, I immediately run up against this always troubling re prefix. There's a lot of words with re at the beginning of them that ask about what we're connecting again to. Were we ever connected to begin with? And what were we connected to? 2 years ago, at this very time, like everyone working in the theater, we were living in a time where the world was exploding around us with incredible change and horrifying realizations and such alive feelings. And at the same time, we were all in lockdown, living in this kind of theoretical bubble of our own homes and reaching out to each other online. And one of the things that struck me at that time was in a really hopeful effort to try to contribute and dealing with MFA directing students that I was teaching during that time, was how much I wasn't digging theater so much. I wasn't really loving Zoom plays. I wasn't really enjoying that. But I was loving the conversation. I was loving all the things that in the before time I didn't like. The lobby. So before the pandemic, I loved going to theater. I loved seeing plays, but I was nervous in the lobby. I was always private and running away from it all and feeling awkward and uncomfortable. And in the pandemic, I loved the lobby. I loved meeting people, all kinds of people I didn't have exposure to, having conversations with. I loved chat on Zoom and seeing the conversations that started to happen and starting to see a dialogue happening in the theater that only happened in my purview in a kind of select and isolated way. There were, of course, exceptions to that. There were some great things that happened in the theater and opera online. And for me, three I will speak to are the Messiah complex that Renelta, who's going to be speaking up, was a creator of with Joel Ivany at Against the Grain. And an incredible retake on Handel in our world, on our land, in the face of our realities. 21 Black Futures, produced by Obsidian Theatre in Toronto. Extraordinary, unbelievable, beautiful, poetic, heartbreaking, and inexpressible island that the Tarragon Theatre did online, and I actually enjoyed it more on Zoom than I did when I saw it at the Tarragon. So it made me think, well, what is going on? What is it about that? Because my natural inclination is to find the platform of Zoom and stuff kind of flat. And I was really missing this breathing together that happens in the theater. But those three pieces were both really playful with form, skillful and articulate in the language of what they were working with, and so vitally connected to the content of what they were presenting. So it made me think a lot about what are the languages of different mediums, of different forms. And the theater is a very particular one. You know, it's described and has been described as the always ailing but never dying patient. And there's a kind of, you can read stuff from the 19th century, people going, the theater is dying. And it's full of paradoxes because it's live. One would think it should respond to the world we're in immediately and promptly, and yet it's very slow. It's very expensive. It's not the best way. If some amazing thing happened in Halifax today, I wouldn't say, go and do a play about it. Because it'll take 5 years to get it up. It'll be old before it can be new. And at that time, as I was saying, I'm teaching an MFA directing program at York. I was the professional mentor for directing students who were doing their MFA on Zoom and having to contend with that very flat medium to do something they had been building towards and realizing in a play. And the language of a director is many things. Yes, it's words, but words are really about 25% of the full expression of what a director does, which includes design, which includes performance, which includes this very relationship between an audience and the artist. And my students were valiant. My students were amazing. My students really, really taught me about what they needed, what knowledge and privileges I had, and to give it over. Because they have so much to say. I was really inspired. And, it was around that time, I was like a lot of you, going down a lot of rabbit holes on YouTube. And, saw one of my idols sort of shatter before me, Katie Mitchell, a brilliant British director, say, live performance is the holy grail that must be abandoned. And what she was arguing for was get into the technology. Move into a new time. Don't hold on, which is a very terrific lesson, but a difficult one. So hold on to what? And I've really asked myself a lot about change and what needs to change and what opportunity there has been for change. But also, what do we want to continue? And this, everything is the same but different, is something I'm sort of encountering a lot as we've moved back to live performance and practice, is seeing, yeah, okay, we really listened and we really thought about it, but now let's go back to doing what we were always doing. So what were we really listening to? What do you want to uphold? What do we want to continue? What do we hold as a value that is important? And connection is a really important part of that, because I've also had the great privilege to witness over the last 2 years the whole makeup of the theater scene in Toronto change. It's different than it was 2 years ago. The leaders are different. The visual makeup of who is running that theater town is a different picture than it was 2 years ago. And it's so welcome, and it's so exciting, and it's so inspiring. So what are we going to uphold, and what are we going to change? And what is the theater we're going to do that speaks in the language that the theater has? So there's a reason I think theater isn't always the most immediate art form, because it's also about, it's not documentary. It has this element that is poetic. And when the nervous theater people get all freaked out about Netflix is our competition or that kind of thing, I don't really worry about that, because I don't think Netflix is the competition for theater. I think poetry is. I think the theater is a reflective art form, and it requires attention and it requires absorption in a different kind of way. And it was amazing to me how much we were able to overcome and continue to in the face of a pandemic that seemed impossible. And one of the realities in my own life in 2020 at the beginning was I was being invited to direct a lot of revivals of existing repertoire, what is wrongly termed classical theater. I don't like this word classical because the word class is embedded in it, and it carries with it a lot of presumptions about what that repertoire is. I prefer to call it public domain. And but I was being asked to do a lot of, like, we want to do a really cool production of a Shakespeare play or something like that. And that's no longer on the horizon. During the pandemic, playwrights reached out. Playwrights came forward with incredible plays, and theaters responded to tell stories about our experience now. And I'm very, very hopeful of a kind of rebirth of a Canadian playwriting and an excitement about Canadian plays coming back. And what I'm really aware of is a question of the audience, building an audience for those stories. I know the writers are there. I know the artists are there. But the work we need to do is about the engagement and outreach to communities about those stories, to ensure that our institutions do not just represent a past that I was part of, but are reflective of the lived experience of the people in the cities and communities that are funded to share those stories and do that work. And that is happening. But like anything, human beings were incredible adaptation machines. We're so quick to adapt and be nimble and go, okay, this is what we're going to deal with. But reflection is an important part of that too. I often felt over the last 2 years, I would just deal with one crisis, and then I would have to put that experience aside to make space for the next one coming on. And I had never been so fully reminded of that as when a play that I am currently directing now by the great Walter Borden, called The Last Epistle of Tightrope Time. It's playing at the Neptune Theatre here in Halifax. Began at the National Arts Centre in January. And the National Arts Centre went to enormous lengths to make that show happen in spite of Omicron, and it was like making a play on the moon. There were only 7 people in the entire building, and every precaution was taken. And we made it through 3 weeks of that to build our show. And then at the end of January, 15,000 protesters showed up in Ottawa, and the Convoy 2020 closed it down. And so it's incredibly resurgent to be here in Halifax, where Walter's from Nova Scotia, to be able to bring that show and present it and forge a way towards connection. So the world has changed. And I live now, each day, trying to challenge this Gertrude Stein epigram or witticism. Everything is different. The challenge is to not let it be the same. Thank you.